Mr. President, I have one question for you. It's an educational question. So my question is, how will you approach public schools choices as a strategy to create a high quality education option for every child? Thank you.
Sweet and short, Rorisang, thank you so much. And finally, Mr. President, the question this morning will come from another grade 11 pupil from Olivenhout Bosch Secondary School. His name is Itumetsi Kekana. Let's give him a round of applause as he makes his way to the microphone to ask the President the very important question as a young boy in South Africa.
Dumelang. I'm from a school called Olivenhout Bosch. So I don't have a question, I'm sorry. But then, now all I want to say is that, you know, us gay people, we deserve a spot in South Africa. I'm not only saying that just because of out of nowhere, no, it's not because of that. I respect the fact that Olivenhout Bosch, the school I'm in right now, it allows these kind of people. We are allowed to express ourselves. We are very free, you know, to talk about our emotions to the teachers. And as for that being said, we have a gay pride on the 9th of September to celebrate these people. Apparently, this is the only school that has gay pride. So, he's my teacher though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dumesi. I'm going to open up the floor as well. I've just been told by the Minister of Education, Mam Angie Mutsekh, that we've got a bit of time for 2 more questions for any other person that wants to ask the question. It can be a young boy present in the room at the moment, or any one of the stakeholders. Please come up to the microphone. Just 2 more people. I see one hand in the front here and one over there. Please come down, young man. Oh, I'm being told at least 5. Please introduce yourself, young man, and fire your question to the President. He is listening.
Greetings to the House at large. My first question to you, Mr. President, is that many cases of GPV go unreported. My name is Sandile Ngcobo. Sorry.
Sandile.
Many cases of GPV go unreported. So how can these barriers be overcome? Because as you know that most of the people that are being violated can't really express themselves. They can't go and report themselves. Secondly, what types of support systems are available for survivors of GPV? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandile.
That's all I can do. That's the best.
Who do we have next? Please introduce yourself, the high school you're from, and ask your question to the President.
Okay, my name is Raatlile Umulumamatinya, and I'm from Sacred Heart College.
Yes.
I'm also a JSC member. I'm the Junior Chief of Staff there. So then my question is, how are we going to combat the mental health of young boys and young men these days when we see that it's been talked about, but then they don't want to come forward? So how do we bring forward certain men's mental health?
Thank you, Raatlile.
Yeah, it's all out. It's all open.
Sorry. My name is Njaka Dandando, and the only question I want to ask to Mr. President is that like rural children in rural areas are not exposed to such projects. Now I'm here like yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, like Mr. President, I want to ask you that like children in rural areas are not exposed to such products. So like how would you, or how is the plan to like spread this information to also them in rural areas like Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and all those type of things? That's only my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, Mr. President. Honored to be here. Thank you so much. My name is Wandile Muradzi. I'm a producer, and I actually produced this film. And I wanted to say, actually, thank you to Prime Stars for the opportunity. But my question, I guess, is how do we address the gap between the LSMs in our country. We find that in our research for doing the film, we notified or we picked up that actually the concept of gender-based violence was seen as a black situation, when actually that's not the case. And I would love for the President to tell us or inform us how we can actually address the issue of breaking the racial divide of gender-based violence being a black thing versus being a white thing, and how we can go forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wandile. Pertinent question that. Could we have up next, please introduce yourself.
Greetings everyone in the house. My name is Otto Amrola. I'm grade 12 learner from Tabajabola Secondary School. I would like to ask the President, how do you plan to address the disparity in education between rural areas and urban areas in regards to the matters that we spoke about before? Thank you.
Thank you, young man. Who do we have up next? Please introduce yourself before you ask your question to the President.
Okay, before I even say anything, I would love to say, Ruti, one of the most annoying things about such big events is housekeeping. Having to acknowledge everyone, but then, thanks God, I don't have to do that because it's a conversation between us and the President. So, greetings to the President. Standing before you is Wakile Mazia, representing Namedi Secondary School. So my question is, since in our societies, there's this mindset, Yoguti, a man shouldn't cry. A man shouldn't speak about how they feel. So how is the President willing to change that mindset in our societies? I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wakile. Please introduce yourself, young man, before you ask your question to the President.
Oh, okay. My name is Emihle. I'm from Orlando East at Bona Comprehensive High School. My question to the President is that how can we protect ourselves as boys? Because there's this mindset, yoguti, I'm tough, I don't have a problem with nothing. Like, we are scared as kids at public school. Like, the security sometimes it's weak. There is nothing that we can do about it. So, can get protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emihle. Very important question that. Do we have anyone else? One more. Please introduce yourself, young man.
Good morning. I am recruited victim lawyer from Parktown Boys High School. My question for the President is that in some countries in Africa, members of the LGBTQ community are being imprisoned. I wanted to ask, what is South Africa's plan in order to have influence on those people? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is that everybody? We've got a few more.
Good day, everybody. I'm Jason McKenzie from CJB, Chris J. Botha. Mr. President, there's a question I want to ask. How do we as young kids and young men make women feel safe, especially in bathrooms? Now that we're having this of unisex toilets, how do we make them feel safe as they enter those toilets? Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Good morning, Mr. President. Morning to all of you in the room. Mr. President, today I want to ask you, seeing as that a room full of young men have been given guidance and hope, how do we give like a whole community of young boys the same message, even though they're not here today?
Thank you
Mr.
for that question. What's your name, sir?
My name is Cole. I'm in RW FIC grade 10. Thank you.
Thanks, Cole.
One last question, Mr. President. Okay, Mr. President. Okay, Mr. President, how do you solve a case whereby cops are... Okay, Mr. President, inama challenges
I'm a challenge is okay, I'm a challenge is when you a boy go to report a case against a girl that is beating you up and abusing you, like how are you planning on solving that? Because we can never be men that go to report a case to avoid beating and raising a hand against women. Eh? Yeah, right. But then must figure when we get to the cops, you like reporting a cut and then we just turn into love stocks. How are you planning on solving that? Thank you.
Siyabonga Thabang. Thank you so much. Mr. President, these are all pertinent questions. In fact, I'm one of the mentors that mentors these young men, and we spend Saturdays with them around the country. So far, about 30,000 boys that we've reached and have been able to engage with since the program started in 2022. And some of the questions that we ask and the questionnaire that we give them are: a woman's most important job is to take care of her home and cook for her family. The responses, in as far as options are concerned, that you have are: I agree with a smiley face, I sometimes agree with a straight face, or I don't agree. And there's a list of all of these questions in the questionnaire put together and developed by Prime Stars. And the response that we get from young men, obviously, is the fact that there's a soft hand that goes with the raising of a young girl child, but it's a lot harder for the young boys, right? We tell the boys, as Utabang was saying, let me say it in isiZulu, like, indoda ikhali, monna ha'ale, awuskala umshimani, man up, things like that. So this very important meeting with you, Mr. President, was to try and address all of that and have the boys in their voice ask you those questions. So would you please respond, Mr. President? And before that, obviously, I need to hand you back to the Deputy Chairperson. Deputy Minister. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. I wish I had your voice. I love it. William Hong from Metro FM. Wow. And now I see the criteria to work in the Metro FM. I'll train my voice to be like that. I think in the very near future, they will hire me there. Minister, let me invite you to come and sweep.
No, thank you very much, Program Director. Those protocol has already been laid, so let me acknowledge the President, the Premier, and the MEs and all the colleagues that are here. And I don't want to repeat, President, the welcoming message from our Premier, but thank you most sincerely for coming to join us. Because this is one of our most important programs as a sector. And to the young people that are here, after releasing the President, we're going to continue to engage with you. Okay? So the struggle continues. And President, this is a very important program for us, especially having the opportunity of interacting with our young people. I'll just give you two, because even as a sector, we gain a lot from interacting with young people. I recently went to get a home on comprehensive sexual and unplanned and unwanted pregnancies. And typical of me, old mommy said, start with abstention to say, don't get into any sex and all sorts of things. Just look, no boys' books, not these old slogans. And because I was interacting with these girls, with these kids, I said to them, any other interaction, speaker number one was saying, no, Minister, all the things you raise are in the life sciences book. Our problem is when we go to clinics, we get judged by nurses. Speaker number two, when we go to clinics, they report us to our parents. And I sat back and said, it's a age gap. So I'm talking about stage one, abstention. People are on stage 3. So they are experimenting. So I'm not talking, but we're not in the same wavelength. And it helped me because then I had to go to Dr. Pasha to say, hey, colleague, get out of touch. People are experimenting. I said, don't experiment. The message from 5 speakers, one by one, was that they're experimenting. So, which means they didn't understand where they are. And it helped me. Then I went to Pasha to say, let's really look at youth-friendly clinics. That's partly why we're here, youth-friendly venues, so that we're in touch with it. So what a generation gap. But the other one, I also went to Mami Lodi with also on unplanned and unwanted pregnancies. And there was this pretty little girl with a very beautiful demeanor. And again, I think the old me is judging. Then I said to her, but Manaka, how did you get here? Because you really look like a very good child. And this child's response helped me because she says, you know, Mama, if I knew, I wouldn't have gotten there. And it's inspired me to go to committees to say, we want you. So we shouldn't assume that our kids don't want us to talk to them. So we should always, when we find time, make the chance to talk to them. Because she said, if I knew, I wouldn't have been here. So I'm very glad, President, that you're here. You also want to know, you want us to engage with you again. That's why I say after the President leaves, we are going to engage and see if you can help me deal with my generation gap. Lina, make sure that you know, and then we're on the same platform. So I'm going to invite the President to come and respond to you. As I say, we will remain with you after this meeting to continue engaging so that we enlighten us the way I was enlightened by Katehon kids, but also, on the other hand, make sure that we can hear you out. So we'll continue after the President leaves. But I know it's your President, you know him again. And I'm glad I'm from here. I can walk to my home where I grew up, President, just across the road. Here, this where my Poyam Wall is, used to be green fields. That's where you used to play games and play housing in this green field. So, and I'm glad what Jabula, they are here. And I'm saying this because here we have a president, a township boy. The other one was asking about township. He grew up here in Soweto. So good things also come from Soweto and from the township. He studied here. He grew up here as a Sowetan. He was a student at Skanondwane. He went to Teflo, troubled the apartheid regime, and they showed him the door. He was expelled from university, but he completed his study. And what inspires me also about the president life, especially for our young children, and that's why we have a second chance program. There are always going to be difficulties, but let's take from the president. They show you the door, you open another door, you come back as a president and a lawyer. So our president is a lawyer after being shown the door. So I can see the president's uncomfortable. President, this is our day with you. I said before you come, I've asked the winner of this year's tenor, just to serenade you because, you know, our children don't sing to our presidents. Pretty Ende was singing for the King of England, and our presidents have not heard their kids, and she's our product. She's our Saskia product. And this is our winner. So I said, you must sing for your president. Undipile, and then there's a baritone here. Has he arrived? Also, there's the tenor and the baritone. The soprano was not won in Gauteng, was won by that province. And I'll tell you more about Saskia. It's one of our most beautiful programs. So then I'm with the president. Wow. I'm
con rispetto, io mi inchino e mi profondo a un sapiente sì perfetto, a un un sapiente sì perfetto, che le qual non v'è nel mondo e le quale non verrà, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, per la gran bestialità. Con ossequio e con rispetto io mi inchino e mi profondo a un sapiente sì perfetto, che le qual non v'è nel mondo e le quale non verrà, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, per la gran bestialità, e le quale non verrà, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, per la gran bestialità, e le quale non verrà, e le quale non verrà. Con ossequio, con rispetto, io mi inchino e mi profondo a un sapiente sì perfetto, a un sapiente sì perfetto, che le qual non v'è nel mondo e le quale non verrà, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, per la gran bestialità. Io mi inchino e mi profondo a un sapiente sì perfetto, che le qual non v'è nel mondo, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, e le quale non verrà, per la gran bestialità, e le quale non verrà. Io mi inchino e mi profondo a un sapiente sì perfetto, che le qual non v'è nel mondo, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, e le quale non verrà, per la gran bestialità, e le quale non verrà, per l'orgoglio dell'ignoranza, per la gran bestialità, 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 e le quale non verrà, e le quale non verrà, non verrà, non verrà.
Shaya in fuku, Shaya in fonga, Shaya in fuku, kukobe sikwaka, Khulumis in fonga mine, iteket in sabu, kukikigi mikemane. Lone manjaga sozele, lone nkana ketelapa. Agede, gitom komba banfu. Ngaishayin fugu, ngaifunza kuchiabla sesikwe, ngaifunza kumnyaka mengutseni. Ngani kwangu mchingi lo mapanga, longa ngelutsi lwemshayelo. Bomlobo kazana, bomgaina bombovana. Yabusiswangu mashenya, yabusiswangu mshaka, yabusiswang mavuba nigafigizijula. Ngiliqhawele nfumine, ngiliqhawele nfumine, ngiliqhawele nfumine, ngiliqhawele nfumine. Yakanjwa ngomashenya, bomjaka navigizijula. Ngithi ngubani lo nembango, ngubani lo bangako. Angakasha ngifile, hayi ngisaphila. Ngawuyatiyenga, ngawuyatilutsa. Angapambana nemvula, ayeka goqa nyawo. wo. Wo ye pi nangini kwale nanfugu. Wo ye pi nakanjwale nanfugu. Naikanjwa ngoma Kenya pomshaka na vegezi jula.
Oh, yeah, I must take that. Oh, yeah. If you are expecting me to do a soprano, not today. What a joy to be here. Thank you very much, Program Director, CEO of the program, Minister of Basic Education, Minister Angie Motshekga, the Premier of our province here in Gauteng, Premier Panyaza Bisufi, the Junior Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Arabile Mapiri, and representatives of civil society, and indeed Mr. Martin Sweet, the leader and the head of Prime Stars. And ladies and gentlemen, it really is an honor to have this opportunity to be in a bioscope. The only thing I regretted is that each time I went to a bioscope, I wanted to sit right at the back there, but they put me in the front seat. And it's really wonderful, and thank you very much, to meet with all of you, our next generation of leaders, next generation of professors, business people, entrepreneurs, and tech gurus, you name it. It's wonderful to have this opportunity. Some of you have asked, why do we want to focus on boys? It's important that we should, and today is clear proof of why we have to. I felt very sorry when the young girls left the choir that has won so many awards, but I guess today is a day for young men and boys. And people ask, why is there a focus on women, on Women's Month, and we really don't have a Men's Month. We don't have a Women's Day and all that. And why is there also a focus on the Women's March? Each time I receive a head of state at the union buildings, I tell them about the Women's March when 20,000 of our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers marched on the union buildings. Others ask, why is there so much focus on women's empowerment and girls' programs and everything about women and girls? The answer is a straightforward one. There is a crisis in our society, a crisis in our country, a terrible crisis that if we don't pay attention to it, about the way South African men treat the women of South Africa, we are then going to destroy who we are as a people and as a nation. This crisis is violence against women and girls, violence that we as men perpetrate. We are the ones who, in a variety of ways, perpetrate violence against women in the way we treat them, be it at home, we abuse them, we violate their rights physically and sexually, and we even kill them and rape them. And in the workplace, we push them to the back. We don't give them opportunities to surge to the fore. So this is a scourge that I described as a pandemic, even as we were going through the COVID-19 pandemic. And we need men, therefore, men to get together to bring this to an end. We are encouraged that we have today with us here young men from different parts of our country, largely in Gauteng, but with what I heard, the questions coming through, some of you come from various parts of our country. Young men who have stood up and said, yes, we want to be part of bringing about change. We want to be better men. And I love the slogan that we must raise a nation of good men. Yes, we want to show by our words as well as by our deeds that we respect women, and that as we are gathered here, we want to treat them as equals. And I want to thank you for taking this important step towards making our country a better place for all its people. Now, this young men's dialogue is very important for me, and I know you will continue after I have left. But you've thrown up to 16 questions at me, and I will, during the course of my input, address quite a number of the issues and questions that you have raised. To end gender-based violence, we must focus on prevention. The women of our country stood up and said gender-based violence must come to an end. They marched to the union buildings, and I wasn't there. And they said, please tell the president that we are not going to leave the union buildings until he comes. And that was 9 o'clock at night. They said, we are going to sleep here. And I feared the prospect of having women sleeping at the union buildings. And I got up and I went at night. And they told me their full account of how the abuse that is being perpetrated against them as women is degrading their humanity. And it is then that we decided that we would call a summit, which summit we held, and we came out with a national strategic plan. It was quite a harrowing period in our country because a number of young women, some of them at institutions of learning, had been killed and brutally killed by men. But what that did is to energize all of us to come to the fore, and the women themselves came up with a national strategic plan. And one of the key issues in that strategic plan is that we must stop this violence even before it happens. So therefore, focusing on prevention is one of the key aspects of what we need to do. And to do that, there must be an open and honest conversation about what contributes to violence against women and against girls. And it is when men talk openly and honestly. We need to talk about things like patriarchal attitudes, attitudes that are inculcated in men from a social point of view, from a family point of view, and from the societal point of view and the environment that we live in. That we men are more important than women. And therefore women have to answer to us, have to do our bidding, they have to listen to us. We need to change and challenge toxic masculinity. the very thing that a number of you who ask questions here address, which is the idea that being a man means one must dominate, but much worse is that you must demean a woman. You must degrade her so much and look down upon her so much. And I always bring up this, and I say people must have in their heads, young men and men must have in their heads very important figures in their lives, and begin to use that as a mirror to see, to look at themselves, your relationship with your mother, relationship of a man with his mother will never be a relationship where you want to dominate and demean her. Your relationship with your daughter, much as you may think you are a father, but you will never, and you should never really want to demean her and degrade her, and your relationship with your sister. So if we as men can have at the back of our minds that type of approach, that in our interfacing, our interaction with the women in our country, we should have that image of our mothers, of our wives, of our sisters, and see whether we do want to demean the other person. We must talk about the influence of culture, yes, and media depictions of men and women, because media also plays a key role. What about the boys? This brings together, yes, government, and I'm pleased that as government we've taken it so seriously and are going to be doing much more as you have challenged us and asked us questions. And I'm grateful that Minister Mutaka, Department or the Ministry of Basic Education is taking this so seriously. But we are also pleased that civil society, like organizations like Prime Stars and all the many others that are depicted here are going to come or are coming to the party. Academia, social society, and various other social stakeholders want to collaborate towards raising a good nation of good men. We've just seen the video, and it listed, and we listened to a number of voices. And what we saw there, much as it is a short video, and I applaud the producer who stood up here to say I'm the producer. This sends a very good and positive message. And it should be a message that is spread around the country, and we will talk about that. We are correct to ask the question, yes, what about the boys? Because young men and boys must not be left behind. And Deputy Minister Mhaule was right. We've tended to focus on women and the girls, and we found that we had left the boys behind. And we're paying more and more attention. And it even happens in households. Even my daughters have said, but Dad, you seem to be focusing more on us and seeking to protect us all the time. What about the boys? And I've said, yeah, I do pay attention. And then they said, but you're paying more attention on us, which is the truth. Which is the truth. So we must therefore change societal approach to focusing on the boys as well, because they must be part of our journey towards a South Africa free of gender-based violence and free of these very terrible attitudes towards women. They must be encouraged and supported to be change makers in society. You face a lot of pressure as young men in the family, in relationships, with your friends at school. The peer pressure is quite intense, where they want you to be the man. Ube ubra, ubonakalayo, ukuthi, you know, uyisiqhwaga futhi, and when ayikho into oyisabayo. And in South Africa today, black men are most vulnerable to violence as well. Young men and boys are vulnerable to being recruited into gangs, and also, as the Premier was saying, into using substances such as drugs and being part of criminal activities. Young men of this country are being made into men before their time, before they even enjoy being young men. They are already being dragged into activities and into behaviors that make them men. You must face the pressure from your friends to become sexually active even before you are ready to do so, because this is seen as the real thing that a man must do. And Minister is right. There are also pressures on women, young women, and therefore they run to clinics, and then the clinic system, or the health system, then puts more pressures on them. Worse yet, engaging in unsafe sex practices is also seen as being more manly. And I must say that our HIV message has tended to weaken over time. And it has encouraged men, and this has been the case for the longest of time, that men must participate in unsafe sex so that they must be seen to be the real men. And of course, this is leading to another huge challenge that we have of teenage pregnancies, the spread of HIV. For some of you here, maybe the pressure, especially once you've gone through ritual initiation to the so-called to prove your manhood in a variety of ways. Far too often, this is having a destructive effect on women and girls as well. So many men, young men, may not have positive role models in their own lives, and we therefore need to talk about these things openly so that even those who can be positive role models can come to the fore. And what we need to do is to have more and more of these occasions. Some of you asked, you are very privileged to have this moment, this occasion, yes, of meeting the president, and you are going to continue with the premier and the minister later. But what about those who are not here? What about those in the rural areas? What about the young men in other townships? How are we going to engage them? And we'll give some indicators of what we can do and what we can do collectively. The challenge of absentee fathers, which some of you referred to in your questions, is one of the greatest tragedies of our nation. Only a third of South African children live with both parents. Most children either live with their mother only or with neither of the two parents. And of course, I was very pleased to hear a historical account of how this has largely come about. The migrant labor system also contributed in a huge way to absentee fathers not being there, fathers not being there in the lives of their children, as they had to leave their homes and go to the urban areas and work to the mines, the farms, and many other places. And this has become a very destructive culture in our country, with as many as those that I've talked about, fathers not being there. We must talk about what it means for young men and boys not to have a father at home to support, to encourage, and to guide them. By the way, the same thing applies to young girls, because young girls also need a father in the homestead. So with all of you now being here, future fathers, future partners, it's important for all of us to remember that it is important as you become a father that you should play a key and present role in the life of your child. We must talk about the pressure on young men and boys to also drop out of school to earn a living because they have a family member relying on them financially. As young men, you too are vulnerable. And I'm highlighting some of these topics so that you can talk about them in the dialogue that is going to continue after I have left. You also, as young men, experience depression, loneliness, and frustration. And you also experience rejection with regard to your own sexuality. And I'm so proud of those of you who stood up here and declared what your sexuality is. But I'm very proud of the schools or the environment in which you are learning, where it is accepted, you are embraced, you are even celebrated, you are even proud that your teacher is here and your teacher knows exactly how to respond to this. That I applaud a great deal. And I say to that school, Oliven Hood Outporch, yes, I applaud you. And I give you a real good round of applause for that. This can sometimes manifest in aggressive behavior towards women and girls. As young men, you may be tired of being told that you are a problem. You want your dignity to be respected. You want your standing in society to also be upheld. And you want the good qualities in you to be recognized. We are here to tell you that what we see in you is not a problem. And what you were articulating here is not a problem. And I see many solutions from what you were saying here. So it is in your hands, to a large extent, to bring about a new generation. And I'm very hopeful with what I have heard coming from you as young men, much as you are dealing with real challenges. The new generation of men that you are going to be is going to be more respectful. And you are going to have a very positive masculinity. And you are also going to carry your manhood in a much more sensitive manner. So I feel very encouraged that you would never be the type of man who would be demeaning women. And this we can achieve by talking openly about it. And that is why your quest to have this message spread around. And that is where I also applaud what Prime Stars has been doing through your various surveys and through raising the level of consciousness amongst young men and men in general and talking about all these things and then later seeing that there is a change. And change can only really come about when all of us get involved in discussions, in dialogues, in a very open and transparent manner about issues of gender-based violence, about how we can prevent gender-based violence, and how men can play a much more respectful and supportive way, demeanor towards women. Now, having convened this dialogue, we recognize that we must engage you as men and boys, and we want to create a more safe and open space where you can talk about your feelings. You're absolutely right. Men are terrified of talking about their feelings. They don't want to share their feelings. And yet women find it a lot easier to talk about how they feel, and they express it in a variety of ways. We men now need to change our approach to talking about our feelings. And we need to share each other's lives together and collaborate more. The focus of your program is to reimagine and reinvent masculinities in a sensitive manner, in a respectful manner. And it is in the end about working with young men and boys through theaters of learning to influence how they view themselves and the kinds of men that they want to grow into being. Now, as government, as civil society, and as business, we should become more and more committed to supporting you in your journey to become better than you are. And you do right to challenge us. The questions that you've posed are challenging questions, and you do well by asking those questions directly to us. And here I thank the Department of Basic Education for being willing, prepared, and have a duty to lead the charge in this regard. And in thanking all of you for participating, I think it is a huge step that you have already taken. But I want to highlight just 10 issues. 10 issues about the role or behavior of young boys towards women and how we can begin to bring about influence, positive influence, so that all of us as men and as young boys realize how we can change our own behavior and how we can discard what we were taught at the home, what we were taught where we grew up, and also what we were taught through our cultural norms in terms of being better young men and better citizens. The first one in my book is that there must be respect and equality. Young boys should be taught and should know that they need to respect women as equals and recognize their rights, their feelings, and their perspectives. And I bring once again the imagery of your mother, because if we bring the imagery of your mother, female, woman in your life, and you then transpose that to your relationships with other women that you come across, your relationship with your mother is based on total respect. It is based on recognizing that, yes, she is your mother, you respect her feelings, you respect her perspectives. I have now taken to watching this soapy, Shaka Ilembe, and I am just in awe of how Ushaka Ilembe respected his mother, and how he treated his mother, and how he wanted to protect his mother at all times, and how even as his mother was being demeaned and degraded, he took it upon himself that I am going to wipe out the suffering and the travails that you are going through. And what it taught me is that if men can treat the women in their lives with respect, with recognition of equality, we will then go a long way. When you look at a woman, you should say, there's no difference between me and her. We are equal. We are equal citizens, and I must treat her with respect, just as I respect everyone else. And the second point for me is empathy. Understanding and empathizing with the experiences of women will help us as men and as boys become compassionate and supportive individuals. Being able to empathize, to have full understanding of the condition that women have. To understand that even things like once a month, a woman has to go through a period that is difficult and challenging for her, and empathize and understand and say, yes, I understand. These were things that were never talked about in the past. They were never talked about, and we need as men to empathize and to understand. It is when we understand, when you understand the other person's viewpoint, when you understand the other person's condition, that your respect and your recognition of them then grows. The third one is to have boundaries. As men, we must know that we have boundaries. It's essential for young boys to understand and respect personal boundaries, recognizing that consent is paramount in all interactions, that there is a boundary beyond which you may not go, even as you interact with a woman. There is a line in the sand that you may not go beyond that. When a woman says no, it must mean no. And you must know it in your head that there is a boundary beyond which I may not go. And these days, it also means that you have to treat women with so much respect that you cannot make insinuations. You cannot even say, your bum looks like this and your breasts look like this. Those are the boundaries that we've got to draw. And some of it goes, against our cultural norms. In the past, you would be doing all those things. When you look at a woman and say, wow, hey, your breasts are like this, and your eyes, the sun rises from your eyes and all that. Those things that I also saw in Shagailembe no longer apply. There are boundaries. There are limits beyond which we cannot go. Why is that so? Because we are equal. Because we have to underpin everything we do in our relationship with women with respect. And we must also challenge stereotypes. Boys should be encouraged, as you are here, to challenge and question gender stereotypes and biases. This helps to foster a culture where women aren't limited to traditional gender roles, whereas some of you were saying, yes, the normal trend and the cultural tradition is that the woman must be the one who tends for the men all the time. That is a cultural and traditional stereotype that we must challenge. And I'm glad that you, young men who are here, young boys, you are beginning to do that. The education that is being calculated to you or being offered to you at your schools is such that you will have the strength, the intellectual rigor to be able to challenge those. And you have to make a stand against the fifth one, against misogyny. Boys must be educated about the negative impacts of misogyny and attitudes, and we must encourage you to stand up against them, to look at women as objects that men should use, to look at women as objects of sex, to look at women as people that you can oppress, undermine, and demean. It cannot be. We are all equal citizens, and our Constitution dictates that we should have that approach. And the sixth one for me is open communication. Boys must be encouraged to communicate openly about your feelings. You must be able to say, I feel depressed for this and that reason, and we need to get into that mode of even crying, because even crying is something that does not get done. And sometimes we don't want to cry even when a situation demands that you should express your feelings. The seventh one is about the modeling behavior. Adults, particularly male role models, should display respectful and supportive behaviors towards women, setting a good example for younger boys to emulate. And I'm reading, and I'm not going to ask you about your reading habits, because when I meet young people, I always want to know whether you read or not. I'm reading a biography of Miles Davis, and he writes that when he, in his household, saw how his father and mother were constantly involved in fights, and his father was often violent towards his mother. He later in life says, I think my own violent disposition towards women came from that. So as men, as you grow up, it's important for you to know that your behavior should become that of a model. You must be a model because those other people in society, they watch you. And as they watch you, they try to model themselves against you. So it's important that we as men, particularly as fathers, we should become good role models to our children, particularly our sons. Because when they see us picking up our hands against the mothers of their own children, then they think that this is the done thing. This is something that we can do. The eighth one is to have a partnership relationship. You must view women, as young boys, view women as your partners in various life activities, from friendships to professional collaborations and other contexts as well. And it's important that you should see a woman as being a partner and making you whole, because they have certain strengths that you may not have. And if you have that type of approach and orientation, it becomes a lot better. And education is the ninth one, is very important. It's important that we should be educated. We should be able to delve into issues that increase our understanding about gender relations. And this is where I will, talk a little bit more about reading. It's important to read. For you as young men, delve into acquiring knowledge. And part of that knowledge should be about the relations that you need to build, particularly with women. And I often ask young people, how often do they read? And quite often I find that many people do not read at all. And when I was 16, I already had a bit of a library at my home. And I say, it's important to be reading all the time. I had a friend, I don't know whether she's here today, who used to tell me, who I know used to read about 52 books a year. 52 books. And I often ask people, how many books do you read in a year? 30, nobody raises their hand. 20, nobody. And quite often, some people become honest and I say, how many of you have not read a book this year? They raise their hand. But soon thereafter, I've met some of them later who say, President, you encouraged me to start reading. I had a friend who passed away who, when I told him this story, came and whispered to me and said, my good friend, I had not read a book for 30 years. Through telling me the story you tell young people, I have now started reading. And I've been to a bookstore and I'm now reading every day. So education then helps to help you change these relations. And the last one is the promotion of positive masculinity, where you yourself display positive masculinity, and it also means that you do not have what we call toxic masculinity. You are able to show your own vulnerability, and you encourage other men around you to show positive masculinity and to be there, to be collaborative, to be supportive towards women. In essence, this is what I believe young men, young boys should begin to inculcate in their heads. Because if we can embrace some of these 10 points, we will then be able to see a change. And what about the boys who are not here? Very good question by Arabile. The boys who are not here are boys that we need to reach out to. And I've often said that what we need to do is to have this type of movement. What about the boys type of movement? And spread it around the country. Martin Sweet has spoken about that we want everyone, all the key role players to support us as we go around the country to spread this message. Yes, in the rural areas, yes, in the townships, reach out as much as possible. I want to be in a big stadium where a number of you can come and talk about the issues about boys and the issues against gender-based violence. I have been saying I want that type of massive occasion. And it should be spread around the country. It should not only be in one setting. So we will be working more closely at programs that we need to embark upon to reach out to the boys, as you say, Arabile, who are not here. And the impact of poverty on masculinity. Yes, impact of poverty on masculinity is quite negative. And in the end, yes, poverty has an overarching and a very negative impact on the status of men, and through poverty, men express themselves in a number of negative ways. As the government, we continue to try to reduce poverty. And this government has done a great deal. The other day, I said that we have reduced poverty from like 17.9% to 7%. And some people doubted that statement. And they went to this organization which is called Africa Fact Check. And Africa Fact Check checked a number of indicators. And in the end, they said, yes, there has been a reduction of poverty in South Africa. And it's come down to about 7%. But that does not mean absolute poverty. There is still quite a great deal of unacceptable poverty in our country. But many of the programs that we have embarked upon have been aimed at reducing poverty. And we will continue to do that, because reducing poverty and taking people out of poverty is one of our key areas of focus. So we will continue to do so, because reducing poverty has other wonderful social side effects, which is reducing gender-based violence and this toxic masculinity. Delene Harry says, domestic violence. What are we going to do to address domestic violence? Domestic violence is a societal problem. And we've been saying we need to get organized as communities. We need to get organized because domestic violence takes place in the household, in the most private setting that we all live in. And of course, sometimes it spills out when the woman who has been abused either runs out of the home, goes to the police station, and that is where we need to give her safety and we need to give her comfort. But reducing domestic violence also means that we've got to raise the level of consciousness amongst men. That in order for you to be a man does not mean that you've got to be raising your hand against women. Tabangwenya openly says, I am gay. What are we doing to accommodate people who are gay? And take it you mean the LGBTQI plus community. Our government has taken enormous strides, has made enormous strides in recognizing the LGBTQI plus community to make sure that they are recognized, they have rights, and they are not discriminated. And this we took as a conscious decision when we drafted our constitution. And we were clear in saying there is freedom of sexual orientation in South Africa. Now, one of you says, doesn't happen in the rest of the continent. And yes, that is true. And what are we doing about it? There's a great deal that we are doing about it, because this is a challenge that many societies have in the world. But the world is changing. The world is becoming more and more aware that there needs to be respect for human rights. You might recall that some 100 years ago or so, there was still slavery. People's rights were not recognized. People were kept in slavery. That has changed. Racism was the order of the day just until 30 years ago. And so because we are challenging that, we're talking about it, and that is going to bring about the change. So I do believe that even when a number of countries have not yet grasped the nettle on the issue of respecting people who have a different sexual orientation, they will. And the discussions and the level of consciousness that is being raised continues. So that is an ongoing challenge, program, and struggle that we must get involved in. Piladi says he's in a supportive schools. How can we change the policies of schools that don't accept LGBTQI+? Minister is remaining, and she will also address that. It's a societal issue, and we need to be changing minds. We need to be raising levels of consciousness. It's an ongoing challenge and struggle. May not happen overnight, but we have great principles, great policies that will be able to get this to be overall accepted all round. We must never stop. We must never tire to raise that level of consciousness. Rory Sang Mutumi says, how will you support public school choices? I didn't quite understand the question, but of course we support the choices that are made in public schools for what is positive. And the minister can talk about that as well. Itumetsi Ekana says that they have freedom at their Olive and Hout school. It allows students to be free. That is precisely what we want for all our schools, to allow young people to be free, to express themselves, to be able to be free, not to fear. And we want fear to be taken out of the school environment. Sandile Ngobo, there are many cases of gender-based violence that go unreported. That is so true, because quite a lot of them take place, as I said, in the bedroom, in the household, in the privacy of homes. And in the end, they are not reported. And the Minister of Police often says that the cases of either rape or so are often between intimate partners. They are the ones who perpetrate that. But we want those cases to be reported. We are finding that more and more of such cases are reported. And of course, we have also taken strides to ensure that our police stations are user-friendly. Our police stations have spaces in the police station where a woman who's been abused can go and report, and the police are trained, and they're becoming more and more trained to be sensitive to the trauma that women will have gone through gender-based violence. So with that, we are saying women more and more should be able to feel free to go through and report, and more so that we've also tightened up the laws that should give women more a sense of security, a sense of assurance. But of course, that on its own does not get rid of gender-based violence. Riatile says, how can we combat mental health of young men? Mental health is quite an important area of disability that we need to be focusing on, and we are focusing on it. Because mental health has always been relegated to the back. And now we are saying it needs to be recognized that the mental status of people is affected by a whole number of situations and conditions, and we need to pay closer attention. And our health system needs to be well geared to be able to deal with situations where people have challenges of mental health. And Dando says, yes, children in rural areas, I think I addressed that. The one who produced this film, didn't catch the name, how do we close the gaps in the LSM and breaking the racial divide? Racial divide remains there, and often say that the shadow of our past still casts on us as we move forward. That shadow is still there with us. Racial attitudes are still there with us, and we need to know that we've got to continue engaging in a struggle. It's like a fault line. You've got to continue closing that fault line all the time, because it can always erupt, and that gap can always be a gaping gap. So we must never think that we have arrived. We have not arrived. It's a process that we need to work on. Zodwa, how do you plan to address the disparity in education in rural and urban? Minister will tell you that one of our areas of focus is how to close that gap. But the original gap was to close the racial gap, the racial divide, where apartheid created schools that are better endowed and with a better education for white people, and for black people, real poor schools in the townships and in the rural areas. The education budget, you may well know that education has the biggest chunk of the money that we budget for the country. It is the number one priority that we allocate money to. And that is aimed at closing this gap. And it's also aimed at closing the gap between rural and urban as well. So we focus on all three at any given time. How will the president, I think I heard this, how will the president change approach on men not crying? I can make them cry. I'll try. I'll try to make men cry a bit more. But it's part of what I've been saying. How will we address the issues of toughness and fear? Yes, I did touch on that we want our schools, our schools, particularly for those who may feel vulnerable at schools, not to have any fear. And of course, we want our schools to be centers where people feel safe. Safe not only from criminality, but also safe from being ostracized in the school environment, where we have a school that is as free and open as one of you was saying at Olivenhout. In other countries, there's discrimination against gays. I think I have addressed this. Yes, there is, I repeat, but it's something that we as South Africans uphold. And we are not ashamed. We are not shy, even as we interface with those countries. And we do proudly say that this is who we are. This is our constitution, and it is a right that these are basic rights that we hold to very dearly. And even as we meet them in overseas settings and all that, we are able to say, this is our South Africanness, a South Africa that recognizes the rights of everyone. Mweketi says, how do we make women feel safe as they enter unisex bathrooms? That's a very important question, because once we work on the attitude of men, say any of the 10 points that I mentioned, once we work on that, and in a school setting, we now know that young men treat women as their sisters, as their equals, they have respect for them, and full recognition of their condition and everything, then we no longer have to fear. And women should no longer fear that is the case. I remember one university, Minister Motshekga, where I went to in the Eastern Cape. They used to have a lot of incidents of gender-based violence, including the brutal killing of young women in the university precinct. And the university started the men's dialogues and took the men student body and did precisely what we are doing today. Spoke to men, got them to stand up, the young students to stand up to speak openly about gender-based violence and attitude of men to women. When I went to that university, the principal, the vice chancellor said to me, since we started this program, we see a vast change. Women now come forward and tell us that they feel safe to walk around the campus even at night. And that has changed attitudes. But he says they'll keep on doing exactly that, but they're also going to follow it up with a girls' dialogue, young women's dialogue, so that they have a separate young women's dialogue, and after that, he says, we are going to bring them all together. And he says, these conversations and dialogues have a huge impact. And I stand here today to bear witness from what you are doing, Prime Stars, what other organizations are doing. What we need more than anything to prevent the scourge of gender-based violence spreading more and more is to dialogue, is to engage. Yes, first we should do it with men, and we should also do it with women, and then together. Talk about it openly, so that it's no longer just speeches. It should be an exchange of views, and it should be an open dialogue where tears can be shed, where fears can be expressed. That is what we need at this point in time, and I'm prepared to lead in that as well, so that we can have this type of national dialogue as you have suggested. How do we impart the same message to boys? Yes, that is precisely what we should be doing. And then another one, which was the last one, says when the girls beat boys, when we go to report, the police laugh at us. Quite often it's women who go to the police station. It's not often that boys or men go to police stations. I've read about them now and again. But the police also will be trained to be sensitive, whether it's a man or a woman. And I know that the training has been focusing more and more on women coming to report. We now need to start focusing on the boys, just as we are doing today. And it is for this reason that I really applaud you, Minister Martin Sweet, Premier, and everyone, for having this dialogue in a bioscope for me. I really appreciate it, and I thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
We can't even stretch just when the president has spoken. Let's give him a very big round of applause.